just yesterday, Fallout 76 had its PAX East panel. At this, we actually found out and saw a lot of the game. We got roughly 20 or so minutes of new gameplay, but even outside of that, we just heard a lot from the developer. Almost at some points, they kept talking over the dialogue so you couldn't hear it. But during this, they revealed a lot. We found out a lot of additional information about what's coming with this game, what it's bringing to the table. And even if you watched the panel, I could say some aspects of this video might surprise you, because there's a few little off-the-hand comments that were kind of major. And watching it back, I was like, wait, he just said what? But otherwise, in this video, I'm going to go over what they said at the panel, go over some of the major takeaways from the gameplay, specifically the last segment because it has a lot more going on, and also provide you just with some of the gameplay in a full screen version without audio. But that, of course, will be at the end of this video. Even further, if you guys didn't see, I actually posted my first impressions on Wastelanders yesterday, so you can click in the eye now if you want to check that out. But otherwise, looking at this panel from Fallout 76, I first want to go over some of the major details we found out overall. One of the big things we saw in the gameplay was dialogue. There was definitely a focus on that, especially as we were towards the earlier parts of the game. But they also shared many other details around this, such as how every special stat is going to be represented as a dialogue skill check in Fallout 76's Wastelanders DLC. So it seems like things like endurance and strength will have their own skill checks from time to time. But even further, there's actually also going to be negative skill checks that can happen at some points. So if you have a certain special that is too high, you are ineligible for that skill check. You have to have a low enough special to actually use it. I don't know if this will enable something like a low intelligence dumb playthrough and unlock special dialogue through that, but either way, this sounds pretty cool and I'm definitely excited to find out more. Although when it comes to skill checks, it's not only going to be affected by your special, but also by chems you use in game. As those enhance your special skills, they will be reflected in skill checks. So you could back out a dialogue, use some chems, then actually pass the check if you previously were ineligible. And just watching the gameplay, listening to the panel, and playing myself, it seems like special checks are going to be a major component of this DLC. I saw them all over, on some major NPCs and some minor NPCs. Although something else we had to look at is finally how instancing tech will work with Wastelanders. So basically, when you go in certain interiors, you're going to only have it instanced to you or you plus your team. So what you do, such as taking down NPCs in that interior, won't be shown to everyone on the server, but rather just you or you and your team. We kind of expected it to work this way, but I think this is the first real official confirmation. We actually get a little pop-up when you enter into an interior for the first time. Although they also did mention that while in these interiors, they'll be saving less often, which I found curious. You could force a save in a variety of ways in Fallout 76, so that might become pretty essential to not losing progress, I guess. I was getting confused by this at first, but maybe they meant it in a sense like if you take down an enemy NPC and then just Alt F4, it won't be saved on the server or something, because you can't just reload saves and try and test out blowing up the base's interior to see what happens. So maybe it's around that. Although branching off of dialogue, something else we heard a ton about through this panel and even in some of the gameplay were characters. One of the comments I found most interesting about this was how it was actually described that there's a doctor in Wastelanders that's name alone is a spoiler. I don't know what exactly this means, but it gets me really hopeful that either this is a doctor that we see in the base story of Fallout 76, like we hear their holotape, or maybe it's a doctor that is actually in later Fallout games, but it's ghoulified, or maybe it's actually someone related to somebody we encounter in later Fallout games. Fallout 76 is the earliest Fallout game by hundreds of years, and I feel like that's one factor that they haven't really taken full advantage of, but something like this is what I was hoping we would get, assuming it does end up being connected to some other characters or some kind of timeline in that regard. But also something pretty interesting that is happening is integration of this new content with the old content. So with Wastelanders, it's not like it's going to be a new game mode or anything like that, but rather you'll have all of the existing story quests of Fallout 76, but also Wastelanders. What this means is that actually some of the old characters from Fallout 76, like Rose, is getting new and additional dialogue, which is something that you couldn't previously do. She'll have dialogue choices despite never having them before. And I wouldn't be shocked if maybe some of the characters from the story that we didn't necessarily meet do make a return in a substantial way. Something else pretty interesting that wasn't shown so much during the panel, but I noticed during my gameplay, they do definitely have references or lookbacks on the old world. Some of the NPCs would talk about what happened in between when the vault opened and when you find yourself now 1 year later with Wastelanders, as 1 year has passed. They kind of treat you as if you just came out of the vault that day, 1 year later than everyone else, and you make certain remarks about the area or even introduce you into some of the old quests. Specifically these two characters you meet right outside of Vault 76, they actually gave me the holotape to start the Overseer's quest for Fallout 76. And even at the Wayward, some of the dialogue choices are about the Overseer, which is new content but in reference to old content in a way. They also get a bit more explicit around the grayness of the two major factions, the Settlers and the Raiders. Bethesda recognized that most people side with the good guys and the Settlers will be viewed as the good guys, and even right now in the PTS they say most people are siding with the Settlers, but they do expand on how exactly they're not just good, and the Raiders aren't just bad. And it seems large in part this is with a focus on land acquisition. The Settlers basically just came into the region, took up with some land, and are like, alright, this is ours now. You're treading on our land that we just got. Conversely, the Raiders are more in a position where they actually lived in Appalachia. They ended up getting pushed out with the Scorched Plague and everything just going badly, but now they're returning to their land, and it's basically this dynamic that's meant to give them each a little bit more of a good or a bad side. As far as siding with one faction or the other, it seems like it's going to be similar to Fallout 4. Up to a certain degree, you could progress each main quest, the Raider and the Settler one, but then once you hit a certain point, you have to make a choice, and that's kind of a point of no return. In one of the past Inside the Vault articles, we were introduced to the Allies. These are basically NPCs you could find around Appalachia, and you could actually recruit them to stay at your camp, and they'll give you little quests or daily challenges. They didn't really add anything additional to this. We didn't find out a ton of new details outside of the fact that there's actually going to be 2 major allies with names and 3 more minor ones that go unnamed and have a smaller role. I saw some people speculating that there would be like 8 major allies in total, but it doesn't seem like this feature is quite that large. But one faction that actually is larger than I initially thought is the Cult of the Mothman. They didn't talk too much about them outside of that. The Cult of the Mothman will actually have multiple locations in Wastelanders, but even further, at one of these locations, at a certain time of day, something special will happen. They didn't expand on this at all, but I'm definitely looking forward to making videos in the future of little things you probably missed in this DLC. But then we hear more about the private test server for Wastelanders, and actually the private test server overall. They describe how thus far they view the private test server as a major success. I'm not sure they would say otherwise though, although it does seem like they actually really are getting behind that, as they mention that for every major patch coming in the future, they will have a private test server to go along with it. I don't know if it'll just be a continuation of the Wastelanders PTS, and then as more people get invited, new things will be added to it. But to me, this basically seemed like they were saying, yeah, we're just going to do a PTS now permanently. Although that is going to create a very, very interesting dynamic, as with many games, the PTS is not NDA'd. It's invite only, similar to this one, but I wonder now if you'll just have a perpetual leaking problem. Bethesda will be like, hey, we got some cool new update coming, and then a few people on the PTS will have full access to it and just tell everyone, hey, this is what happens. A lot of times people will actually just have access, and such as YouTubers will make videos on updates as they're posted to the PTS with the disclaimer that it's early and still subject to change. If it'll stay private like it is right now with Wastelanders, or actually become more open and not all NDA'd. Because I feel like if it does stay private, we'll just continuously see that casual leaking of information. Although, they do describe that one of the existing benefits of the PTS is they're actually rebalancing the endgame of Fallout 76 for Wastelanders. They don't expand on this too much, but they just basically say, yeah, because of the people giving us this kind of feedback, we're making this change. And how just overall they really changed their structure to now being feedback driven. You're going to release things, have people playtest it, implement feedback, and then actually release it for everyone. And that's really the strategy they're going to use with future updates for this game. And even further, if you're hearing all this and like, oh, I wish I was in the PTS, well, I do too. They do also say that it's going to be expanded over the next few weeks, so new invites should be going out. One thing that was just mentioned offhand quickly at the end of a sentence was the gold bullion system. Seems like this might be some kind of new currency with Wastelanders. I haven't read any leak ever in my entire life, so I couldn't expand on it any further. But yeah, they said it during the stream. It hasn't been properly introduced thus far, but who knows? Maybe there's some rumors about what it actually does. Although something else they mentioned that I find pretty interesting is how they actually did some lighting changes with Wastelanders. Basically doing a pass for the game overall and increasing things like contrast as well as changing up some of the reflections. When I sat down to do my playtest of Wastelanders, it was played on a PC, I immediately thought things looked different. I couldn't exactly put my finger on why. I thought they looked better overall. And after that, I just kind of was like, oh, it's probably just because it's a monitor I'm not familiar with. But I think it might have been this, and if so, it definitely is an improvement. I like the way things looked during my playtest, but of course I couldn't record that, so I can't easily compare and contrast it. They mention how with Wastelanders, a few new events are getting added to the game, and one specifically is known as riding shotgun, and we get some gameplay of that. Probably the most interesting gameplay out of the bunch. But they also mention how overall, they're actually trying to change their mantra with events going forward. with the goal of making some of these events have some more optional objectives so everyone participating will have a job. It seems like this is very much so inspired by Meat Week in the style we see with that DLC, where there's a ton of things to do, some of which are optional, but it basically is what they're doing going forward. You could just do the main objective and complete things that way, or if you have a bunch of people, some others could do the optional side objectives and maybe you'll get better rewards, it'll make things easier. We also heard a bit about what's to come after Wastelanders. They mentioned that'll be a future event down the line, so either this means that there's going to be a totally new and standalone event for Fallout 76, there was recently a community-focused one announced, but it normally is NDA'd, or the other likely choice is E3. So perhaps at E3 we see a much more substantial, hey, this is what the next year of the game will look like, but unfortunately that still is a ways away, about 100 days until then. As far as things that we should expect from this though, they mentioned things like the legendary perk system, the ability to actually scrap excess cards, and also something known as the One Wasteland Rebalance, which will make its way onto the PTS at some point. But this One Wasteland Rebalance thing is actually pretty cool. More or less, it'll make it so if you and your friend are both fighting an enemy, but your friend is level 10 and you're level 100, the game will be rebalanced so each of you are doing competitive amounts of damage. Enemies will always be balanced to your level, so there's not going to really be any more low-level zones and high-level zones, or at least that's the way I interpreted it. This will definitely make it a lot easier to play with people who are just getting into the game or starting out on a new account. You don't have to one-shot everything. You could actually have a bit of a challenge, and it will make it hopefully a bit more interesting. They also mentioned they are working to expand the camp budget in-game, although it seems kind of far out and nothing super specific, and then do provide a community map for us going forward. This really isn't a roadmap. It kind of is a roadmap, but it's like a more community roadmap. Most of what you find on here is around Appalachia, which is this photo thing they do online. Basically, people submit photos, then Bethesda features them, a bunch of legendary purveyor sales, but then towards the middle to end of May, we're getting a few interesting things. The new Treasure Hunter event. I don't know what that means exactly, considering it looks like it's for a limited time, only 3 days in total, or perhaps it's just a gradual rollout across all 3 systems. Fosnot will be making a return on the 19th, and that will actually lead us into E3, which is typically around the 9th or 10th of June. So that was more or less what we found from the panel of Fallout 76. But now, taking a look over at the gameplay, I'm not breaking down every nitty-gritty detail. The gameplay you're actually seeing in the background is basically me taking that little box and blowing up to be full screen, so it's likely only a 720p raw video, and I'm editing this at 1440p, exporting it at 1080p, but I think specifically looking in that final stage of the gameplay, when we actually see the event in action, you get a lot, and in particular a look at a lot of the new items coming with this DLC. We see a lot of the new weapons, things like the Plasma Caster is on full display here, but even a bit more exciting, we get looks at several of the Gauss weapons we knew were on the way. Of course, the big one, the Gauss Gatling rifle. This reportedly is an ammo sink, and it definitely looks like it is going to be one. It'll be very interesting to see if this is really the top tier heavy weapon in the game, especially if you find a good legendary variant of this one. We get a brief glimpse at the Gauss pistol separately, and also in the inventory we can see the names of several notable weapons. And of course that notable unarmed weapon making a return from New Vegas. And then of course we see the bow in action, which is probably one of the things I'm the most excited about when it comes to new items. The bow mod we have for Fallout 4 is one of my favorite weapon mods. It's just very satisfying and enjoyable to use. And we can see the bow here with custom arrow types, and we also know perk cards are coming to support it. I think that really is going to be one of the most fun to use weapons, even if it doesn't end up being the most powerful. Reportedly, there's actually going to be a full scale or full screen version of this gameplay to come out, and I think with that, it'll be a lot easier to do a more comprehensive breakdown at some of the more finer details. If not, then I will just struggle through the 720p-ness of this. But overall, something I found interesting is, one, all of these weapons look really cool. Like the design, the textures, the visuals on basically all of them get me excited to actually use it. If this was a bunch of free mods, I would be immediately downloading and covering it. But another interesting observation is basically throughout this entire gameplay, we don't see any new weapons, which does seem to suggest that we have a fairly comprehensive list in what we've been teased or told about in the past, which is actually fairly long now, as we've basically known about all of these since QuakeCon. The only one that did get revealed recently was the one in the most recent Wastelanders trailer, which we see gameplay of here. But I have to imagine this is probably almost it, or we know about almost everything. There's not going to be 10, 15 others that come out of the woodwork and are a massive surprise. Now for the final part of this video, I'm actually just going to leave you with some of this raw gameplay. I just basically cropped it. It's from the official Bethesda stream, as well as cut up to be in order. You will have the unmatching commentary over top though, so do make note of that.
because my art skills apparently are mad, I guess.
Lead designer, Ferret Bodwin. Lead artist, actually, Nate Perkypile.
Hey.
And design director, Mark Tucker.
Hi.
So thank you for joining us, guys. We are getting ready to jump into some Wastelanders gameplay to show off. And so let's get started right outside of Vault 76.
So right away, you're getting the new Wastelander content right out of the doors. And even before, in the vault, we went through and did a pass to make sure that a year has passed, you feel it, it makes sense. For some reason, you make it up. You decided to sleep in for, 12 months or so. So
there's an example of our new quest.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, would you leave? I'd stay for a year.
It's kind of
It's
sensible.
really cozy in there. But yeah, there's been some changes to how the quest system works, too, and how it looks on the map now.
Oh yeah, the paper map is amazing. It really presents a world of opportunity. You can select and highlight any quest on the map and activate it or deactivate it, so you don't have to dig into your Pip-Boy at all. You can just go to the paper map and see what's out there.
And for those that have visited Vault 76 before Vault 76, this is a new addition to it with Wastelanders.
You get people. Look, they're talking. It's human beings. It's amazing. And the more, the other thing is that we get to go back to the sort of the strengths of Bethesda. You know, the conversations. We're trying to connect with you with human beings, with emotions. You know, try to give you a real impetus for why you're doing the things you're doing.
Right outside the vault, like we display here, or if you're a high-level character, it's
Both
same?
work. Both work.
Oh.
Yeah, like you get the new intro sort of straight out of the gates, and you can jump right in. But high-level characters can go back there, and they respond to that, too. Because if you're super high-level, then they're a little bit more intimidated than perhaps somebody that's fresh out of the vault.
Yeah, we wanted to make this friendly for both new players, people who are coming back, as well as the veterans. I'm sure several are here who have played the game for hundreds, if not thousands of hours to find new and exciting content. And special checks and dialogue.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. If you are annoyed that we're talking over some of this, don't worry. We'll put this footage up online. So
You will not get an empty dungeon. You will get an experience which is going to be full of life, tailored to you going in there.
Yeah, this is super exciting technology for us. I mean, not only for Wastelanders, but for everything we're going to be doing in the future. So it literally is a game changer for us, and you should expect to see more of that kind of content moving forward.
as you can see, you can go in with your team or by yourself. And remember, this also alleviates the lineup at the princess and all the other things. So like Ferret was alluding to, like we can make substantive changes to the storyline based on your unique interactions with the NPCs. It's exciting.
Very personalized experience. Let's enter the Wayward.
Well, not exactly the introduction to the Wayward I would have hoped for. Well, sorry about that, darling. First round's on me. Name's Duchess. There's something I could do for you.
As you can see with our dialogue
Your
here, we're
guess is
not
as
just
good as
limiting
mine,
the player to
sweetheart.
4
He busted in
specific
here saying I needed
options.
to
There's
turn over the
a number of
location
different
some fellow named
ways you can
Frank,
interact with
who I
NPCs
guess
based
I
on your
must have served at
specials, the
some point
previous
or another.
events you had
Since
taken
then,
part in,
a steady
as well as
stream
your
of
what kind of
miscreants has been
character you
making
want to
my
roleplay.
life
The
irritating.
funny thing is, as writers,
Not
a lot
exactly
of us,
good,
if
but
anything,
business.
we had to limit the number of choices. There were a lot of passes to where it's just like, oh my god, like that's more than a screen full. So we're trying to
Now
get
that you
it to the
mention
right
it,
level of role
like-
playing.
Exciting to see this wide cast of characters. You know, before we were doing a lot of interesting quests for characters that had effectively died before you came through, and now you get to see these characters, interact with them, and there's some very memorable ones in the lineup. We'll talk about
We'll
those
see
in a
some
bit.
of them.
Yeah.
I wanted to pause it right here because, Jeff, you had mentioned the speech checks earlier. We have a red charisma here, which means
The funny thing is that the character over here has too high a charisma. So we have negative speech challenges too, to where it's actually like if you're really not so great, you can choose. It's one of the best speech checks in the game, actually, because you basically say like,
Not sure
yeah,
I've got
we should
enough
send
on
out
hand,
invitations, and then
unfortunately.
she's like,
No.
yeah, you can do
We're
that,
gonna
honey.
draw
You
them
know,
in by making them
it's
think you're Crane.
but we just went
Just give me
crazy
1
with them
second.
because it was, we wanted to add specials. I was planning at one point of doing a pass over all the dialogue to make sure all the specials were represented. And like I said before, I had to actually like yank them out. It's like, okay, we have enough endurance checks.
Just
We
want
don't
you to
need
know,
another.
architecture
Here's
ain't
more.
I remember
exactly my
one where there
forte.
was like every special was
Huh.
represented.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
bad.
A little much. We do show
So what
locked
a
doors, as
chicken
you saw there
scratch
too.
together
So
here for you
there was
is
a big
the
debate on the
schematic
design
for
team whether or
one
not to show
custom
those or
made
not.
Crane
I
treasure
think I
hunting
won it.
Inc.
I don't know,
sign.
but I like
Didn't
knowing
butcher
what
the
I
plans
could
too
do if I
bad.
played a
It's
different
got a
character.
little
So it
system
makes it
built
exciting for
in
me.
It
to
also-
know that there's other
sending out an
possibilities.
You could also
advertisement
back out and take
and
some
getting this
chems
gang's
sometimes
attention.
if you're so
Yeah.
inclined. And you can pass
You just
checks
need
you
to
may not
build
have been
it.
able to pass
Use
before.
the tape it spits out to tell the world
Who doesn't
you're
love chems?
open for business. And
Do
then
you have a
convince
favorite- do
any
you guys have
punks
a
that
favorite
show up
NPC
to
that you've
tell
added
you
so
where their
far?
boss is hiding. They didn't teach you
No
how to
spoilers, no
build from
spoilers.
I'm gonna go.
schematics up in
Well,
that vault of yours,
can we say? We'll
didn't
say
I?
names. Gale. Gale, I think, is personally my favorite.
That's the spirit.
I think one called Fuzzy Brenda
mine right
in
there.
Camden Park.
Mort's really good.
What are you on
I also
about,
like, well, not
Mordecai?
actually, even her name is a spoiler, but there's a doctor I really adore that is fantastic and
Oh,
quirky,
Mort, not
and
the tapes. Well,
yeah, I
find
can't
yourself
say
one
anything more,
refresher.
but there's a host of
Talk to
characters.
You'll
Mort.
find out all
Of course
about
you're
them
gonna
on April
need
7th.
materials, but we should have enough lying
Mort
around to cover you there.
Is voiced by
Get you
somebody
together a
that
little
people may be
care
familiar with, right?
Throw some rations
Yes,
in there too, so you
I
don't
can't
starve
remember
on me.
his actual name, but
And
it's
so you
Jay
know,
from Jay and
Jason
You
Silent
might have
Hughes,
to break
right?
some of
Yeah.
the scrap down for parts.
He nailed it.
But I can spot you some workbench
I feel like he did a
materials,
great
too,
job
since you're
of
doing me such a
sounding
favor.
exactly like the ghouls do, but
Who
giving that
knows?
inflection and
Maybe
that
you'll
different
learn
tone,
something
so
while
it's
you
a
do it.
completely different experience from like a Hancock. Maybe.
What's
Ready to
wonderful
get
about
this
all this
show on
too
the
is because
road?
before there were no choices, right? So you were
It is
forced
a lot to
as
ask.
people
Fine.
writing quests,
I
the
could
quest designers would
do
have to make it so that
75,
you had
but
all
that's
the
as high
information,
as I'll
absolutely
go.
all the information, and
That
sometimes
means
that
you're
meant
up to
that
the
it was pretty
task.
long before you actually got through somebody talking about what the quest
Hot
was.
dog.
Whereas here, it's like,
Have those
no,
dope
like,
on our
if you
back
want to
at
drill
long
down
last.
and get more, you
Just
can
make
ask
sure
more
once you
about, like,
find out
more
where
about
they're
the camp and
hiding,
how to build a camp
their
and stuff.
leader
But it's
gets
not
the message.
forced in front of you. It's
The
something that you
wayward
choose
gets
to do.
left alone.
We actually went back to previous
and on
dialogues,
the
too.
topic of
So, like,
leaders,
characters like
you know, one
Modus,
of my people found this
Rose,
tape in the camp across
the mayor
way,
of Grafton, who's
recorded
awesome.
by
We can
one
go back and you can now
overseer
actually
of
talk to them. Right? Like, some of my favorite lines that we rewrote were like talking to the mayor of Grafton, like saying, you know
But
that
it seems it
everyone's
might have
dead.
been
He's
left
like,
for someone
yes.
from
And it
above.
makes governing these people way easier.
And that's something we plan to do
Sounds like she
more of
set the
moving
camp
forward,
up
is
so
going
people
back
could
and
get some
revisiting some of these old
practice
characters, giving them a few more
So
dialogue
relax.
options. So
I feel like it's
Probably
almost
worth
it's
looking
comfortable.
into.
Having played in the PTS myself, in speaking with some of these existing characters, I didn't even process at first that there was now a dialogue option. It just feels like it's just natural part of the progression now.
My hope is that people coming in fresh, they will have no idea. You will tell your friends, like, no, the mayor did not do that. That was not there. When we were talking about 76 launch, imagine none of that. And that it's just like you have these, thank you.
Man, I feel like a lot of people are going to fall in love with Mort.
It's the hair.
It is the hair. That's slick hair.
Yeah, definitely ask him all the questions you can. It's hysterical.
And the human NPCs, or ghoul NPCs, which I guess count as human, right, are not the only new addition. We've also added a whole bunch of new locations, including 2 main civilizations.
Yeah, so there's the 2 main factions. And here you see Foundation, where the settlers have built up at Spruce Knob, which was the highest point in West Virginia. And before, it was just a workshop, and people would go there and build stuff. But I thought it was such a great space that I wanted to really build it up. And all the people here have this background in construction. So it's like really clean and new, with armor plating on log cabins, which is a great aesthetic, I think. So you can get a good look of it here.
I imagine that the cities kind of act as like a hub location where you can purchase things and trade with other players. And all the players interact with like the NPCs, and it's a good time.
As you get to know these characters too, like I could see either like a Creator or Foundation. It just could be the new place that you just go to do stuff, because you start to hopefully empathize, care about these guys. We want to try to make each one of them distinct. Like you definitely get a vibe here from a Foundation that these guys are perhaps more civilized, but they're actually also squatters, right? Like these people came arguably taking your land as 76ers to make it their own. And so they kind of have a vibe of like, hey, we're here, we're taking this land, we're good people, but it's our land now, which makes it a kind of interesting dichotomy versus the Crater, who, they're raiders, and so that's, typically you'd think they're wearing the black hats. But actually, for these guys, this is their land. They arguably were here before even the people of 76 came out of the vault. So if anyone has a claim to this area, it's them. So it makes it so that it's not a black and white choice, that you could really make a more nuanced decisions. And, as you get to know them, you might say that, like, most people play good guys. So, we expect a lot of people to go with the settlers. But the raiders, it's like they have a point, and if you really listen to them, you're like, yeah, why are those settlers over here? They don't own this land.
Yeah, everyone just thinks they're scary because they're hanging up corpses, but that's just so they don't
They
have to
gentle
shoot you.
hearts.
Yeah.
I don't know, Farrah. It sounds like you'd be a raider then.
Actually, what we found in this was just interesting for the PTS is that the majority of people have played the settler side, and I'm a big role player too, so I like playing the white hat, as Farrah puts it. But man, the Raiders quest line's outstanding in this, so you could definitely do both. We can talk a little bit about how you can dive into both as well. You don't have to just choose one or the other for most of the game to the end. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Sure. Pardon. No, you can basically, like, at the very beginning, you do make a choice of, like, who you initially are talking about. The main quest, can't get into spoilers. But it's not, you're not precluded from basically, taking a little from column A and a little call from B. And you can sort of go down both quest lines and to a point to where you have to make a decision. There's a point to where it's like, dude, if I do this, there is no way they're going to work with me on this. So, but you can go far enough that you can really get a sense of who these are. Whoever you wind up siding with, it's not like you can't be friends with the other side. We have a reputation system, and so the side you do choose to help, those guys you're going to get a big, huge bump on your relationship with them. But it doesn't mean you can't go down the other path as well.
I love this location. Do you want to talk about that?
Beautiful.
Yeah, this is underneath Foundation, so they have dug out this whole sewer area here. You can see some of the lighting changes that we did here, because we did a whole pass on the entire game to change how the lighting works. So it's less flat, there's more contrast, reflections show up better, stuff like that.
Yeah, as a player, I just love seeing this world evolve over time.
Mm-hmm.
Having seen what it's like from launch to this point, and then moving forward, how the world is changing, and seeing these new locations pop up. It's
really alive for everyone.
It's awesome. We've talked a lot about the story and about some of the characters that you'll meet, but there's also some new events that have been added. Mark, do you want to talk about some of the events?
Yeah, we've got a couple of events lined up for Wastelanders. Right now we're looking at one of our standard events that's player-initiated, Riding Shotgun. This takes place in the existing location of the Big Bend Tunnel. You're going to help the Blue Ridge Caravan escort some pack Brahmin through the tunnel. And surprise, surprise, things are going to not necessarily go the way you would want them to. You're going to end up having to fight off a bunch of raiders. And, I'm distracted because I'm looking at our new weapon here, the bow, which is super cool.
All sorts of new weapons that we've added.
Wow.
And it's not just arrows.
Archers.
Yeah, you can mod the bow so it explodes or does poison, lots of other things.
I think I also saw some. Is this unique power armor to Wastelanders?
Yeah, we have the Raider and Settler packs, so those both have their own unique power armors. We spent a lot of time on those, and they look great. And you can also see one of them has the Plasma Caster, which is back from the Fallout 1, so that was always my favorite weapon. And also the Gauss minigun, which is like the most expensive weapon to fire in the game.
There are also perks related to the bow as well.
So one thing, going back to the events before I got distracted, one thing we're trying to do more of with our events is give players more jobs in these events. And so, for example, in this one, obviously your primary role is to protect the Brahmin, but there's optional objectives where you can go find these hidden supply caches. And they're going to be different every time you play through. And if you find those supply caches, you're going to get a much better reward at the end. And the same goes for the other event that we're adding. Again, there's a primary objective, but then there's all these other side objectives that you can do. So you're really going to need to coordinate with other players and work together to get the optimal results in the end.
Another thing is just, obviously we're adding dialogue throughout the entire game, but it's a real game changer for events, because now you're dealing with people. You're getting to learn some stories about who's here. Actually, it's variable. So there's different variations of it where you get to see different members of the caravan company. Some possibly a little bit more friendly than others.
And I keep seeing Blood Eagle come up as an enemy? Who or what is a Blood Eagle?
A Blood Eagle is a Raider's raider. Like, you can join the Raiders. They're initially hostile to you, so they'll attack. But there's a group that no matter what you do, they're going to be your enemies, and those are the Blood Eagles.
It's also a Norse method of torture.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Look that up on YouTube. Or
History lessons.
I'm not exactly sure what's in the caravan, but they really, really want it.
Yeah.
Like, really want it.
Those poor Brahmins.
It was important for us to introduce some